Okay, I believe we have a quorum. Is that correct, Judy?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Let's start the meeting. The November 9th meeting of the Faculty Senate will come to order. Welcome, everyone. We do have a quorum, but before we launch into the agenda, I just have a couple of reminders. After each presentation or report, senators will have the opportunity to ask questions or offer comments. So senators who use the audio feature, senators may use the audio feature, right? So you can raise your hand and talk, or you can use the chat. But the senators who raise their hand and speak will be recognized before any of the senators who post in the chat comment. So I do ask that you wait to be recognized before you speak. And when you are recognized, please announce your first name, your last name, and your college. According to Robert's rules, senators are permitted to speak up to 2 times on any one motion. And so if there's a motion on the floor and a senator has already been recognized twice, you may not be recognized for a 3rd time. And finally, senators and panelists, if you aren't speaking, please be sure to mute your microphone. So our first order of business is the approval of the minutes from our October 12th Senate meeting. The meeting minutes have been distributed as an annex to your agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes from the October meeting? Okay, it looks like we have one possible correction. Assad, go ahead.
Yeah, Assad Dawari from Berkeley campus. Probably I said this before, and it's not significant. Welfare committee, I'm a senator, and also research integrity. It says no. If it's don't mind, you can change it to yes. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you. We'll make sure that you're added to the Welfare Committee and the Research Integrity Committee. Could you lower his hand? Julie, would you mind? Thank you. Okay, are there any other additions or corrections? Okay, hearing none. Are the minutes approved pending the changes with the Welfare Committee and the Research Integrity? Yes, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Julie, could you lower the hands? Okay, moving on to our next order of business, which is our report from President Gee.
So it says, oh, there you go. Okay, can you now hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Natalie?
we can.
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you. So anyway, thank you for everyone gathering together. We are craning toward the end of semester, and the provost will talk a little bit about that. And also I will certainly have some more comments if anyone has any answers or any questions. Let me just say that, I thought about a number of things that I could say today, but I think we've all realized that we've just been through a very brutal and bruising election. And I'm hopeful that the university itself will start leading the way toward more civil discourse and certainly a conversation that makes a lot of sense. The election did not turn out the way that a lot of people were predicted. The polling is a miserable science. And frankly, I think that most pollsters need to be hunting for a new job because they really did get it wrong in so many different ways. And our nation is really divided. We have a president who received over 70 million votes. We have a president-elect who received about 74 million votes. The House, the Congress is much tighter. The Democrats lost a few seats in the House, which was unexpected. The senatorial contest is still up for grabs. As you know, 2 seats in Georgia, which will be decided on the first part of January. And so that leaves a lot of us in sort of limbo if you're running universities, because we really were very hopeful that we would be able to move quickly toward a new CARES Act or Stimulus Act. I'm not certain whether that will happen or not. And in all of the proposals that have existed, our university would have received between 40 to 48 or 49 million dollars, and that of course closes a lot of gaps, but we have to worry about that. In the state houses across the country, the Republicans solidified their majorities. In fact, they flipped 2 state houses. They won every governorship that they needed to win. So there was no blue wave as expected, and I think we just all need to understand that. Secondly of all, in West Virginia, the Republicans, there was a red tidal wave in this state. Both the House and the Senate in this state are veto-proof Republican now, and we have all the state office holders are Republicans. So that does not present a challenge because we have great friends in the Senate and in the House, and certainly our governor is a strong supporter of the university. But it does mean that we are going to have to continue to make our case for investment. We're going to have to continue to be cognizant of the fact that we have that some of the issues that have been raised in the past about the university, whether it be campus carrier or others, that will certainly be up again in some form or other. So we have to muster our friends and work very hard at it. And then obviously in terms of the university itself, budgetarily, as you know, we've worked very diligently to make certain that we're on sound footing, but both our board and the realities of the case are that the pandemic has continued and continues to show no sign of abating, even though Pfizer today announced that they will have a vaccine available fairly soon. And the thing, of course, that's encouraging about it is it's right now it's running at about 90% positive, whereas you know that even in flu vaccines it's between 40 and 60%, but that will not be available for a period of time. Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, others have vaccines that are almost ready to be available too. But in the meantime, the world is going to continue to be COVID specific, and our numbers are way up. We're starting to see our numbers start to spike here in West Virginia and in Morgantown, and we're monitoring those very carefully, and we're very hopeful that we can keep them within a range that will allow us to continue our plans as we have outlined. So, saying all of that, it's an interesting time, but we're also going to. But also, I will just say that it's a time in which we're going to have to challenge ourselves about the various changes that are relevant to the future of our university in terms of consolidation and in terms of reinvention, all the words that I have used, but those are absolutely critical right now. And we just need to stay ahead of where the world is going. Otherwise, we're going to be trampled by it. So saying that, Natalie, I don't have any specific issues because the provost will be giving a report, but anyone who has any questions for me, they can ask me now or ask me later. I'll be sitting here cheerfully involved.
Other questions for President Gee? Okay, hearing no questions, we'll move on to the report from Provost Reed, who, in addition to her updates, has one for information item, which is Annex A, the statement on COVID-19 and faculty governance.
Thanks, Natalie. Good afternoon, everyone. So as President Gee just said, we are in the final stretch of the last 2 weeks of our on-campus semester. As a reminder to everyone, the university made a decision back in June not to bring the students back after the Thanksgiving holiday. So we'll have a week of online classes and then finals week online. And then students will come back on the 19th of January. Also, as President Gee alluded to, we have seen an uptick in cases, not just in Morgantown, but at WVU. So if you go to the Corona virus dashboard, you'll see as of Friday, we started to see an increase in cases. And so we're watching that very carefully. Those are predominantly student cases. We had a total of 6 employee cases. 2 of those are faculty and in the health sciences. And again, our evidence strongly suggests that our classrooms are safe and that these transmissions primarily occurred off campus. I will also say that Jeff Coben, who is the Dean of Public Health and who is really overseeing the health and safety efforts here at the university, he just said that we need to continue to be vigilant in adhering to the the public safety measures, masking, social distancing, and there's going to be a message coming out probably on Wednesday from the university about continued warnings and admonitions about student behavior. So the other thing that you should know is that we feel that our teams are managing this very well. The contact tracing team, student health, the cases are being assessed very quickly, and students are being put through the system. And we also have a great deal of availability in our Arnold Hall should we need to isolate students on campus. And we have many hospital beds remaining, if it should come to that. The other thing to share with you is that if students test positive prior to the 24th of November, they will be allowed, if they want, to isolate here. They can isolate in Arnold Hall and services will be provided to them. Should they choose to quarantine off campus, we're figuring out where students might live and how we would service them. But I think that's really a positive in the sense of if parents don't want them to come home and they're sick, that we will take care of our students here. We are now, of course, looking ahead to the spring 21 semester, which we know will provide students with a mix of instruction pretty similar to what we did this fall, but with a small increase of in-person classes. Our goal, again, is to preserve as much as possible the on-campus experience for freshmen and graduate students, and whenever possible, to offer capstone experiential courses to graduating seniors. Now, our students started registering today. So the extent to which, or the extent of the number of students who will be online versus having a face-to-face experience may vary, but as prior to registration, 57% of course seats were designated as online, 10% as hybrid, and 30% as in-person. In addition, 54% of online courses will offer synchronous or real-time instruction, which is an increase of nearly 8% from fall. And we see that in our office as a positive because the majority of complaints that we do get from students and parents is about the fact that we're offering too much asynchronous online instruction. And I will tell you that typically when faculty and administrators talk to those parents and those students, they share the amount of actual support and resources available to those students, and that, that typically, quiets down some of those complaints. But in general, that's where we're hearing complaints. So it's good that we're, particularly for freshmen and sophomores, that we're offering more synchronous instruction. I will tell you that we're hearing from the care team that our students are under a great deal of stress. Really beyond anything that we've seen before. And I just think it's important so that, number one, you understand as faculty, that whenever you can, to be gentle and supportive of students and understand where they're coming from, but also to raise the specter of a possibility of adopting a pass-fail grade, opportunity for students this semester. We are not necessarily advocating it out of our office, but it is still an option. And I would say if faculty have strong feelings about that, let us know one way or another. But really, the students just feel like they're not performing. They have enormous anxiety about everything, but the online experience for many of them is also very, very stressful. So I share that with you. As you know, we have got to plan the academic schedule months in advance. And so, yes, we are already planning for fall 2021. The tentative schedule based on last year's fall will be circulated to the academic units over the next week or so for changes and adjustments. Right now, we are planning for a typical fall, meaning a return to mostly on-campus instruction. But of course, we do not know what the future will hold. But it is, as you know, much easier to change a schedule from on-campus to online than it is to do the reverse. So, you get those schedules. We're not making a statement about fall yet. We're just, doing what we think at this point is the path to least resistance, and we'll see what happens. At this point, we're also looking at a normal summer, which means courses scheduled for in-person instruction would remain that way. The bulk of our summer instruction is already offered online, and there will be plenty of room and classroom spaces to socially distance. So again, these are our tentative plans. We will adapt and, excuse the expression, pivot as we need to. We've not made a decision yet about summer abroad or faculty-led, abroad trips, but we hope to be able to make that decision as soon as possible. On the other hand, I think it's important to recognize that the majority of countries where our students and faculty travel to are not accepting Americans at this point because of COVID. So it's kind of moot. Let's see, faculty and staff support. In addition to seeing adverse impacts on our students, we continue to recognize the stress that the COVID-19 crisis is having on our faculty and staff. Our Faculty Emergency Child Care Fund has not seen a lot of takers, but there has been a tremendous demand for paid tutoring services for the children of faculty and staff. In fact, there has been a greater demand, far greater than supply of available tutors. This has been a much bigger undertaking than we anticipated, but we are working on this for spring and hope to be able to accommodate many more faculty and staff who have this need in the spring. In addition, my office has partnered with Talent and Culture to launch several new parenting discussion boards for employees. And this will give you a platform that faculty and staff will manage. We will be out of the mix. We've set it up, but now we're out of the mix. And this is to enable you to swap strategies, pool resources, and come up with shared solutions to the shortage of childcare. And I do want to say this came directly out of a conversation that we had with a faculty senate leadership about something that we could do to support faculty with childcare needs. And then finally, there's been so much demand for mental health services that the university's hired another full-time counselor for our faculty and staff assistance program. We recognize that this is certainly is stressful for students, and it's stressful for our faculty and staff. And then finally, in this category, my office is sponsoring a webinar that'll be held tomorrow called Self-Care in the Time of COVID. And it's from 1 to 2:30. You can still register for it. So far, we have 70 people who are attending. This is for faculty primarily. It will be recorded, so if you can't attend, you can watch it once it's uploaded to the web. Brief update on retention. Even during COVID, and actually especially during COVID, student success continues to be a priority. As we have addressed in previous presentations, the retention rate of first-time freshmen increased more than 3% between fall of 2019 and fall of 2020. We know that some of that was due to a one-time relaxation of our academic policies, but we know at least 1% of that was due to our really increased focus and effort on this topic. So to continue the momentum, we are again working with the academic consultant Torchstar, and they have provided us with a 3-year retention roadmap, which identifies several concrete actions that we can take, such as addressing courses with high DFW rates, developing realistic paths for struggling students, and strengthening and further professionalizing our academic advising and support services. Associate Provost Evan Witters has created a committee consisting of 27 people, about half faculty and about half relevant academic administrators, and they will be tackling the effort in the coming year. And then the College of Law, I wanted to share with you that dean search for the new dean of the College of Law is well underway. At this point, the committee, which consists of faculty and administrators and alums, has identified 5 finalists that they want to bring to campus for a series of virtual interviews and presentations. And they want to start that as soon as possible, perhaps as early as next week. And the decision is to basically have the 5 candidates, interview virtually, but then when it comes clear that they're, 1 or 2 top candidates, that they would come to campus for a more selective set of interviews and meetings, just because we want to keep that group very small. We figure any candidate, most candidates will want to come here if they know that they are one of the top candidates. The only thing I'll say about the law school dean search, or the other thing I'll say, is that the process, really the new way of doing things, and this is really based on what our search firms have told us is the way to do it, is that we typically will announce the finalists, or one at a time, 2 days before their arrival to campus. We do that so that it protects the anonymity of the candidates on their home campuses as much as possible, leading up to when they are giving their presentation, doing their interviews. So those will be shared via campus email, but or e-news, but we wanted to share that. I wanted to give you an update on that. And then the final thing I want to talk about is there was a statement that you were all, that was provided to all of you. And I just want to say a couple of things about it, not a lot, just a little bit. This was a statement from my office that was created as a direct response to concerns around COVID raised by Faculty Senate leadership about 6 weeks ago. I mean, it's almost 2 months now. And since then, this group of Faculty Senate leaders and several people from my office have been going back and forth through a really collaborative process to identify those areas of concern and what we felt the provost's office could and the university could commit to at this time. And so what you have is a document that identifies those areas of concern that were raised by the Faculty Senate leadership and the commitment that we are making, the administration, to supporting you know, I would say supporting our ability to respond to those concerns. So I'm just going to say, without going over every aspect of the document, let me just briefly share what I believe it says from a central perspective. And one is it commits to adding faculty to key COVID-19 planning committees, even those that are not primarily academic in nature, but which impact faculty. And in fact, that has already been done. So if you go to the Provost website, you will see that every committee, planning committee that is identified has at least one faculty member, and most of them are from Faculty Senate. We worked with the leadership to identify people to serve on those committees. We acknowledge the rights and responsibilities of faculty during COVID-19. We acknowledge the vital role that faculty have played helping us to navigate this crisis. And we affirm that there is a formal process if, and I want to just say if, all caps, if for any reason there would be a reduction in force. And I would say, please do not read anything into this. This is the language that came to us from Faculty Senate leadership, which we support. So it's not, there's no hidden agenda here. Truly, this is just saying that if anything were to happen, we want you to know there is a formal process. We don't just do things willy-nilly. And then finally, I think the most exciting part is that my office commits to a collaborative process to review and possibly revise our faculty governance model with the goal of strengthening and improving faculty governance at WVU. And I don't know, Natalie, if you want to add anything, because you were very involved in this process.
I'm going to say something in my report when it's my turn.
Okay. So that's it for me. That was a lot. Sorry, I went on a bit, but happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for Provost Reed? I see one hand raised. And I see something in the chat. So we'll go to the person who has their hand raised first. So that's Dave Hauser. Go ahead.
Provost Reed, it's Dave Hauser from Eberly. Just wanted to actually back you up and get you to comment a bit more about the pass-fail. In other words, that's not an option that faculty have at this point. That would have to be something that
Right.
would be turned on. And then it sort of sounded like you were saying it's up to each faculty member to decide to do that. And I'm a little confused.
Yeah, no problem, Dave. No, it is the call of our office, and it would have to be institutional, right? It's not just an individual faculty member. But what I'm saying is that if faculty have ideas about this or strong feelings, they can communicate with us. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, it looks like there's one question in the chat, and it comes from Wagner Benedito, and the question reads, what strategies are we ready to use against campus carry? So this is in response to the change in the makeup of the legislature, state legislature.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll answer that. That's the reason I've been out visiting with everyone for the last week or so. We don't know that it will come up, but you can anticipate in a legislature that has become even more a Republican in that sense, that it could well arise. But remember what I said, we have a tremendous number of friends in the legislature, and it was actually the Republican Senate that killed it the last time. So we will continue to work with all of our friends, and hopefully either the measure will not come up, or if it does, we will be able to make certain that it is not passed. Saying that, our strategy this time will just have to be to go after it full force. We tried the compromise model the last time, and the truth of the matter is it just didn't quite work out the way that we wanted, even though it did not pass. But I think that we'll be very aggressive this time around. As you know, it's been passed in a number of states, That's one of the problems, is the fact that it has been passed in a number of states, and the issues have been almost negligible in terms of any issues that have arisen from it. So our arguments continue to be diminished in some ways.
Are there other questions for the president or the provost? It looks like there was a question in the Q&A, and I'm not sure if it's from a senator or an attendee, but this person is asking about their schedule for the spring semester and when they'll hear.
I really can't answer that, but we could, just because I thought everybody knew their schedules. So I guess this is the fact. Does that person want to ask the question or maybe let me know offline what department they're in or anything? We could try to find out.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Hearing no further questions, we will move on to a presentation on the intellectual property rights, especially as they speak to our classroom contexts. And the presentation will be from Senior Associate General Counsel Ryan Watson. You ready, Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Natalie. So I will share my screen. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Natalie mentioned, I am Ryan Watson, Senior Associate General Counsel, and it's my pleasure to be here today to talk about our Board of Governors Rule 1.5 covering intellectual property. So I'm going to start out today by giving an overview of the rule, and in conclusion, I will focus more on the copyright portion for ownership of course materials and courseware. So the basics of the rule was adopted by our Board of Governors June 21, 2019. It applies to all WVU employees and students, as employees and students are terms defined in the rule. And it covers our Morgantown campus, our Institute of Technology in Beckley, and Potomac State College. I'll mention that our office spent many months drafting the rule. We started by surveying 25 peer institutions. We looked at the IP policy at all the Big 12 schools, regional institutions such as Ohio State, Michigan, Pitt, Carnegie Mellon, Penn State, going down into Virginia and the Carolinas. And we also included Stanford, given the publicly available nature of all of their policies. And we really wanted to draft a rule that was on par with our peer institutions. We had an initial draft, and then we had meetings with a committee of faculty put together by Dr. Matt Valenti. He was very helpful to talk through the draft rule and its application, as was other faculty, including but not limited to my former law professor, Matt Tolo. And then following that internal input, along with our research office and VP, Dr. Fred King, we then went to a public comment period, received public comments, revised the rule accordingly, and then submitted it to our board for approval. So in summary, all forms of intellectual property, as that term is defined in the rule, are owned by the university, and that's per each employee's employment agreement. However, there is an exception, which I'll discuss in further detail in a few slides, where the employee retains copyright in their own scholarly, pedagogical, or artistic works, except for computer software. For student ownership, students retain IP when it's created for a accredited course. That includes a self-funded thesis or dissertation, when it's created as part of an extracurricular activity, and without more than incidental use of university resources, and that quoted term is a definition in the rule, or they conceive and reduce to practice the IP in a university innovation center such as our launch lab. And similar to employees, each student retains copyright to their scholarly and artistic works. So when a student creates IP, there's a few circumstances where it is owned by the university. One of which is when a student collaborates with faculty staff under internal or external sponsored research or a third-party sponsored dissertation. And that's regardless of whether that collaboration is for a accredited course. And I recall when drafting the rule, we really looked at Stanford and Carnegie Mellon as a model for this carve out. And that's because this institution does a high volume of private sector and federal government sponsored research. In those sponsored research agreements, the university owns its IP, but it may provide to the private sector partner an option to license the IP. Or if it's federal government sponsored, Bayh-Dole applies and the government has search and margin rights. So in those agreements, to represent to our partner we own the IP, we crafted the rule to provide that when the students working with faculty staff enter that agreement, it is owned by the university. So also the university owns when a student employee creates IP in the scope of their employment. IP is created using more than incidental use of university resources, and it's not associated with a accredited course, or in the rare circumstance, as otherwise agreed to in writing by WVU and the student. So the IP rule, it delegates the management of the rule to our research corporation and our Office of Technology Transfer. And they're responsible for protecting IP and seeking licensing partners to commercialize the IP. So upfront, they'll receive an invention disclosure and they'll incur costs with external patent counsel to determine how best to protect the IP. And they'll work with third parties to market the IP to seek a potential license agreement. I will note that we have an internal committee, the Technology Transfer Assessment Committee, chaired by the VP of Research, Dr. Fred King. And I sit on that, I think it's an 8 or 9 member committee on behalf of the General Counsel's Office. And that's where we meet bi-weekly. And we review invention disclosure forms. If we've previously filed IP, we'll determine what's the market to protect that technology. Should we seek a conversion to a utility application in the US or overseas? If we have a proposed license from a third party, are those terms equitable to protect the university's interest and investment in that IP? So Rule 1.5 provides that all employees and students must disclose university IP to tech transfer per an invention disclosure form. And that needs to occur at least 90 days prior to a public disclosure, which could be speaking at a conference, for example, or 1 month after the creation of the IP, whichever is earlier. I note this disclosure requirement is only for university-owned IP. I'll discuss in a few slides copyrightable works retained by the employees. That is not something you have to disclose to tech transfer. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out to tech transfer to talk through these concerns. And I provide the link here where you can go and download their invention disclosure form. And again, tech transfer is very helpful to walk through that form and how to complete it. And of course, disclosure is very important to you all as faculty because we have revenue distribution by net proceeds, which if the invention is commercialized and the institution earns revenue, 40% of that goes to the inventors, 10% to the inventor's department or division, 10% to the inventor's college or school, and 40% to the university. I note when we drafted the rule, we wanted our revenue distribution model to be on par with peer institutions. I would like to point out that a certain school up north, the Pitt Panthers, they only provide 30% to their employees for patentable inventions. So we definitely beat Pitt in that regard. I will further note that the invention disclosure form, it's very important because it helps determine how that 40% share of net proceeds is distributed if you have co-inventorship. Because that form might say we have 3 inventors, 2 inventors are 25% each, the other third inventor was 50% to the creation of the invention. then any future revenue would go to those 3 co-inventors based on that percentage contribution on the invention disclosure form. So I mentioned I'd spend some more time on copyright. The employee retains copyright in textbooks, novels, poems, musical compositions, and other works of artistic expression to the extent that these works are not institutional works. So the university retains copyright in institutional works, which are copyrightable works created for institutional purposes in the course of your employment, but they're not directed to the personal initiatives of the employee. So some examples include simultaneous or sequential contributions over time to course materials, courseware, and course design that you use to teach at WVU, videotaped or recorded lectures and courses, university software, training programs, orientation or marketing materials. I will note that for course materials, courseware, when it's owned by WVU, this policy is not intended to prohibit your use of those course materials if you're going to teach, with leadership approval at another academic institution while you're on a sabbatical leave, if you're going to give a guest lecture, or if you're going to use a PowerPoint to teach at a scientific conference. We certainly encourage, the use of your course materials here for other academic engagement. And I also further note that if you were to depart your employment with WVU and wish to use your PowerPoints and syllabi at another university for teaching purposes, just please reach out to the Teaching and Learning Commons and our office, the Office of General Counsel. Typically, this use is quickly granted. We'll just want to make sure that any university trademarks are removed from those PowerPoints or those handouts. In closing, I did want to point out that Rule 1.5, it does provide that the university retains the right to use an employee-owned work for any purpose. However, this is only to the extent that the university's use does not conflict with the rights you have granted to a third-party publisher. So in the event WVU desires to use your work and you have an agreement between yourself individually and a third-party publisher, then the university must purchase or license that right directly with the third-party publisher so as not to interfere with the rights you've granted to that publication company. And I would note that anytime you are entering into a publication agreement, which is between you and the company, it's not through the university because you own that copyright. Just make sure it is approved per Rule 1.4, our Ethics and Conflicts of Interest rule. So in closing, I would encourage you to reach out to Tech Transfer if you have any questions on intellectual property in general, invention disclosure forms, or Rule 1.5. I would just say, don't ever assume that an idea might be too trivial. Definitely reach out because these folks can help you determine if it needs some further work or if it is something worth protecting now, which we may need to do so before you go on to speak at an event or release a publication, which could potentially risk losing certain patent rights. And I would recommend that you reach out to our office if you have a question on, is my copyrightable work owned by me, the employee, individually, or is it an institutional work? We're happy to talk through those questions, review the facts, and provide a prompt answer. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Looks like you have a couple of questions. So I'm going to take the question from the person who's raised his hand first. So Shine, go ahead.
So my question kind of goes to how the rule kind of works together. You said that the employee retains copyright in scholarly, pedagogical, and artistic works, except for software. But then you say that it's not intended to cover institutional works, which include course material, courseware, course design, and recorded lectures. Those two things seem to kind of contradict each other in that if we have course materials and coursewares and course design that isn't covered, and then you say that we retain copyright in kind of our teaching materials, how does that work?
So yeah, it's certainly not, it's difficult to draft at a high level and implement, these details. But so for example, if you have contribution to a textbook, of course you would own that work. And that's why the rule tries to list those examples that I had in the slides. And then for course materials, those of course are your PowerPoints, your syllabi. And the reason for that ownership, for example, is, let's say a faculty member has to go on medical leave abruptly and have a colleague step in to teach the course mid-semester. Well, that colleague really doesn't have time to develop the materials needed to continue the course. We don't want to have that as a disservice to our students. So the faculty member steps in to conclude the semester. But of course, per one of my final slides, if you were to leave the institution, we're more than happy to work with our faculty to ensure that the content they've put into those slides, they can take with them to teach at their new employer.
So at that point in time, does it become a non-exclusive license to WVU? And we, as the faculty member, get to retain the copyright? Or is it that, how does that work exactly? Again, it seems to me that we're kind of divested of that interest as faculty members, which doesn't seem like, that didn't seem like what it was intended.
Well, I mean, each time, let's say you were to leave the institution, we could certainly work through, if you were requesting a legal assignment or per your points, just acknowledgement that you have a non-exclusive license. We would indicate as the rule is written that we maintain that ownership. So yes, technically you would have a non-exclusive license to use that work at your next institution. But I would say that our goal here is to be a good employer. So, if you were to reach out at that time, we'd be happy to review the material in question and then just work with you as is needed to accommodate your requests going forward.
Okay, it looks like there's a question in the chat, a couple of questions. So the first is, with respect to software, how does WVU claim rights on software created at a prior university? Actually, this is in the Q&A, not the chat, sorry, to be specific.
So can you repeat that question?
Yeah. So with respect to software, how does WVU claim rights on software created at a prior university, at another university?
That sounds like a pretty fact-specific scenario. So if software is created at a prior institution, that institution likely has IP rights to that creation.
I wonder if this is a follow-up. This is a question from the same person. So if employees have taken work from a prior institution and have retained non-exclusive rights and work from a prior institution, how does WVU claim exclusive rights on those works?
So if the employee has a non-exclusive license from the prior institution, that sounds like it might be a separate scenario. They're not creating anything new under their work here. The work there should be a document from their prior creation granting them those non-exclusive rights to use it here. And then of course we could talk to the details if they're creating derivatives to or improving that work, how that ownership might work now that they're at WVU. And that'd be something I'd recommend they reach out to Tech Transfer to talk through in detail.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, just one last thing. Would you mind sharing the slides with us so that we can post them, your slides with us?
Yes, certainly.
Distribute them, great, thank you. Okay, thank you, Ryan. Next up is my report. Okay, so there was a question earlier about the campus carry and the legislative agenda. And so I have, per another senator's request, asked Rob Alsop to come to the January meeting. And I just heard from him, and he will come to kind of talk about perhaps the forecast and what we might expect from a Republican-dominated state legislature. So that's that will be in January. So next item, as the provost mentioned, the statement on COVID-19 and faculty governance came about because of concerns brought to the attention of Senate leadership. And the document, as she mentioned, is the result of a lot of back and forth conversation. And it's meant to do a few things. So outline the current freedoms in the classroom with respect to modality, provide some clarity on how ESCIs will count over the next few semesters, and reassure faculty that there's a process for a reduction in force should that become necessary. And that WVU will make every effort to retain faculty. And then lastly, the statement is a commitment to strengthen and improve our structure of shared governance. And, you know, in a show of good faith to those shared governance ends and efforts, you know, I'm just going to reiterate that the provost has started to include, that office has started to include more faculty on COVID-19 planning committees, but also committees that will do work beyond and outside of COVID-19. And I think the task force that she mentioned that is comprised of 27 members and half of those is faculty is a good example of that. So I have two more things that I'm going to say, and that is the ad hoc committee on third-party tools should have their recommendations ready to present at the March Senate meeting. And then the dean of the libraries, Karen Diaz, will present at Senate in February, and she'll be sharing the library's new vendor policy. So that concludes my report. Are there any questions for me? Okay, so next up is the Committee on Committees report. Jennifer, are you ready? Oh, it looks like there might be a question for me. Okay, Parvis, go ahead. A couple of questions.
Yes, just how do you feel about an immigrant, the biggest democracy, become the vice president-elect of US? How do you feel? Or
personally?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy about it. You know, Kamala Harris is of Indian descent, just as I am, and that feels pretty good to have somebody who looks like me in one of the highest offices of the land. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Okay, Emily, go ahead.
Hi, Natalie. I was just wondering if we could perhaps also ask Rob if he's coming to the January meeting to give us an update on the university budget at that time as well.
I can do that. Other questions for me? Okay, thank you. Julie, will you clear the hands? Thank you very much. Okay, so now next up is the Committee on Committees report. So Jennifer, are you ready?
Yes, and it's the curriculum committee,
Oh,
actually.
curriculum, sorry.
It's okay.
Curriculum committee.
We're all good. So I have 3 items for approval and 1 for information. So for approval, Annex 1 is the new courses report. Annex 2 is course changes. And then there is a 1 program new certificate in behavior analysis. The information item, the grad programs report is for a grad certificate in quantitative and qualitative social science research methods. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to take them.
Are there any questions for the curriculum committee? Okay, hearing no questions, we will combine the 3 for approval items into one votable measure. So all those in favor of approving Annex 1, the new course report, Annex 2, the course changes report, and the new certificate and behavioral analysis, please raise your hand. Trigger finger. So it looks like 67 yes votes. Julie, would you mind clearing the hands? Any opposed, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, very good. And there's also one for information item. Annex 2, the graduate programs report. Are there any questions about Annex 3? Okay, hearing no questions, we'll move on to the Jeff committee. Lisa DiBartolomeo, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. We have 2 courses that have successfully completed the Jeff transition. We have PLSC 140 and PLSC 206. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for the Jeff committee? And any questions about Annex 4? Okay, so we'll move on. Next, we'll hear from the Teaching and Assessment Committee. Jessica Vanderhoff, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you. So the Teaching and Assessment Committee met on Thursday, and we are currently working to finalize the report on the early semester teaching assessment, as well as the post-assessment instructor survey that we received close to 500 responses from. So thank you to those faculty members who did respond to the post-assessment. We hope to have that final report to the full Senate by the next month's meeting. And in addition to that, we have a subcommittee who's working on an inventory of all of the professional development activities surrounding teaching and assessment. So as everyone knows, there's many university calendars. Teaching and Learning Commons does a great job in trying to compile most of those professional development activities. But there's other units who are offering such activities. So what we're hoping to do is make one kind of comprehensive calendar, and we're hoping to work with TLC to kind of complete that, as well as the Provost's office. So hopefully by early next year, that calendar will be up and going. And so that's all I have to report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Taco? Okay, moving on to the Committee on Committees, Membership and Constituencies report. We'll be hearing from the chair-elect, Anne-Marie Hibbert. Anne-Marie, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Anne-Marie Hibbert, Chambers College, in for Michael. We have one approval item, Annex 5. It's a change to the Library Committee, a new chair-elect, and the population of the third-party vendors committee.
Are there any questions about Annex 5? Okay, all those in favor of approving Annex 5, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like there are 3 yes votes. Julie, can you, well, 76 going up. Can you clear the hands? And no votes? Please raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, very good. Annex 5 passes. Next up, we'll hear from the faculty representative to state government, Roy Nutter.
Good afternoon, Roy Nutter, Statler College, and your ACF rep. A couple of things. You're following the news. There have been a number of state schools that are doing layoffs and program closures. Two-year schools probably hit it first. I know some of the two-year schools are closing programs and they have given notice to faculty. And then Fairmont a few months ago, closing a couple programs. It's not clear to me what's happening to those faculty. And then in the past week, West Virginia State University, their board of governors apparently put in place the RIF rules, which I guess WVU's had in place for quite a while. But as part of that, they announced that they would be doing layoffs of 16, and they said faculty and staff, and to my knowledge, they have not announced or notified who that will be. I think just as a side comment, I think what I hear WVU is doing fine. So don't let it get your hackles up too bad. The other thing is legislature. We were talking about it here a few minutes ago, but what I'm hearing from the legislature is that in all likelihood, given COVID, now this assumes current COVID, pre-vaccine, they were looking at ways to separate the legislatures in the chambers. And they were talking about even using the balconies for the legislatures, which would pretty much eliminate any spectators. And in addition, what I was hearing was that the plan was to deal only with the budget and have no other business or bills until later in the year. I haven't heard probably in the last 3 weeks how that's changed. And of course, the legislature has changed in the last few days, but I wouldn't be surprised that will be the way it operates, at least in the early spring. So we may see a completely different time scale for legislative operations for next year. Completes my report.
Are there questions for Roy? Okay, next up, we'll hear from our Board of Governors rep, Stan Heilman.
Thanks, Natalie. The board actually met Friday, and one of the things that happened was that we approved Board of Governors Rules 1.6, which has to do with discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, and so on, and 6.1, student rights and responsibilities of student contact. These were amendments to the rules to bring those rules in the university in compliance with the most recent Title IX regulations that were issued by the U.S. Department of Education. So those that have been up for comment, they got one comment that was handled, and so those were passed. We received a classified staff report from Lisa Martin, who's the classified staff representative. One of the major things was that the auditing firm of Clifton Larson Allen looked at WVU and WVU Research Court's financial records and gave both of those unqualified or clean audit opinions, and they were very, very complimentary about the job our financial folks had done here. And as we've talked about in multiple venues at this meeting, much like today, we received several updates on COVID-19 preparations in the spring moving forward, as Marianne reported to us, and then some extensive looks at the finances as we move forward and kind of where things are now. And as Emily mentioned, hopefully we can get Rob here in the very near future to present kind of a more comprehensive view to us about kind of where things sits and what's going forward. But as Roy mentioned, I think all things considered, the university has done pretty well. And we're really pretty lucky to have some very, very good financial folks in Rob Alsop and Paula Congilio in their office in the way they've been able to do things through this. And so that's my report.
Are there questions for Stan? Like there's
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Stan. Thank you for your report. So could you tell me about this Title IX? And I know I brought it up, I think 3 years ago when Betsy Duval was talking about it. And so can somebody tell me what's the crux of what it is in this Title IX and what has changed and in just elevator, talk and because now we're gonna have a new administration. So I just want to know where we at. Thank you. Sorry about.
I mean, I can try and give you like a 30,000 foot overview, but it's probably more for Stephanie or the diversity inclusion folks. But I think when Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration came over, they basically shifted, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, shifted the, I guess the proof of things to equal things out, I guess, more or less between those that were accused and those that were doing the accusing. And I think that's kind of the general thing that happened. I think, the Title IX regulations that were in that document were just simply amended to maybe more reflect that. But the nitty gritty of it, Stephanie could probably tell you much better than I could.
Is Ryan still here?
Or Ryan, he could probably tell you that too.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I asked this 3 years ago and we had a, I think, presentation on it in the Senate. And I never got the crux of what is really is being done. So it's okay. Thank you.
It doesn't look like Ryan's here anymore, but that's something that we can get clarification on.
Well, I am here, Natalie, but I would.
Oh, there you are. Okay, good.
Yeah, I encourage you to reach out to Stephanie though, because that's more of her practice area and she'd be happy to advise in that regard.
Okay, thank you. That's what I'll do. I'll reach out to her. Are there other questions for Stan? Okay. On to our next item on the agenda, new business. Is there any new business?
Hi, Natalie. Hi, it's Lisa DiBartolomeo, and as a result of serving on, I'm not sure what the task force is called, the Student Wellness Task Force or something like that, but one of the issues that Carrie Showalter from the Office of Student Conduct raised that she asked me specifically to pass along to Senate is to try to connect the dots. So she doesn't have a way of knowing, for instance, if a student is not completing the daily wellness check or is in some other way not in compliance with the COVID regulations, if the student doesn't report themselves or if it doesn't come up in some other way, it's really hard for her office or Amanda Demastiani's office to keep track of that. So one of the things that they have asked that we do as faculty is if we get an email from Amanda or from Carrie asking, is this student attending your class, whether in person or online, to just respond. She was very clear that she didn't want to have another layer of emails that we all have to respond to say, oh, so-and-so was in my class on such and such a day, that it's really only a few students that they're talking about. But she did ask that if we get an email from her in particular or from Amanda, that we do pay attention to that and respond to that so she can keep track of whether those students are following the sanctions and are in compliance.
Okay, so we'll just pass that information on to our faculty.
Yeah, thank
Great.
you.
Is there any other new business?
Natalie, can I just say something about testing for faculty?
Sure.
Yeah, so I meant to say this. I want to let you all know that over the next 2 weeks that faculty can be tested in advance of the Thanksgiving holiday for COVID, and just to remind folks that the community testing is this week is Wednesday at the rec center, and then next week it's Friday at the rec center. Faculty, you can get a test anytime. Outside of that, you just need to call or to make an appointment, or register. But if you are already teaching on campus this semester, you don't have to register because they already have your name. So I just want to let folks know if you want to get tested before the holidays.
Provost Reed, will that be sent out to all faculty?
I believe that was included in the message around testing last week. So I believe I'm repeating what's in that message specifically, but I may be going into a little more detail. So we may need to send another message if that level of detail was not included.
Okay, I'm going to go backwards a little bit. It looks like I've been prompted to look at the Q&A, and looks like Melanie Page's post has pointed me to someone else who might speak in addition to Stephanie Taylor, or provide some insight on DEI and Title IX. Okay, and that's Akia Bozeman Carter. Thank you for that, Melanie. Okay, is there any other new business, any additional new business? Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, is there a second? Great. Great. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Stay safe.
You too.